If you think that everything in Hollywood is just beautiful and glamorous, then you should take a closer look at these actors. In today's video, we present you 10 movie stars who live a life of luxury, but in reality have an extremely hard fate. Among other things, we show you superstars who have lived on the streets for a long time, film icons who had to watch unbelievably cruel things in their childhood, and even series heroes who have now gone completely crazy and are hardly recognizable. So, it's going to be very fascinating. Be sure to stay tuned here at Wonderlane. On number 10, we start directly with one of the biggest Hollywood stars of all time, who has countless fans worldwide and has already fascinated audiences of millions in dozens of films. And that is none other than Johnny Depp. While Depp has long been one of the highest earning actors in the world and lives a life of pure luxury, there is, unfortunately, a side of him that hardly anyone knows. In his childhood, Depp had an extremely hard time. Since he was never able to build an emotional bond with his parents, he preferred to spend his free time at the age of 12 in dark nightclubs and hang out with people who were not good for him. Even as a teenager, he started smoking and drinking, consuming any substances he could get his hands on, and get carried away with petty crimes. He was even part of a small gang of burglars who indiscriminately vandalized and sought physical conflict with others. Because of these early experiences with illegal items, many observers suspect that he was never able to truly work through the traumas of his childhood. Indeed, as he regularly struggles with alcohol problems to this day, and often makes rather inglorious headlines, Depp still seems to be struggling with the demons of his past. Let's continue with a famous actress who probably had to experience one of the worst things imaginable in her childhood. We are talking about Charlize Theron, who is now one of the most celebrated Hollywood stars, and even won an Oscar for Best Actress in 2004. Away from the fame and success, however, dramatic things took place in her childhood. Namely, Theron grew up with an alcoholic father, who not only treated her mother verbally very badly, but also regularly inflicted violence on her in a terrible way. One evening, her father even came home with a gun and fired at his own family. But fortunately for her, the whole thing ended smoothly. To this day, Charlize Theron often has to think about that traumatizing night, and it's not surprising that this terrible experience will accompany her throughout her entire life. Next, we come to an actor who, behind the scenes of Hollywood, is considered one of the nicest people around, despite the fact that he has had to accept more losses than anyone else. We are talking about Keanu Reeves, whom most people probably know from his legendary role in The Matrix. The superstar's life has been marked by numerous tragic events that have left many wondering how a person can endure it all. Already as a young adult, he lost his sister, with whom he had an extremely close relationship with, to leukemia. A short time later, he also had to cope with the fact that his best friend, River Phoenix, who incidentally is Joaquin Phoenix's brother, fell victim to an addiction to narcotics. As if that were not enough, Reeves had to accept the next stroke of fate in 1999. The daughter of him and his girlfriend at the time, Jennifer Syme, was born dead. Only a short time later, Syme also died because she was driving under the influence of alcohol. With all of these terrible experiences, it is almost a small miracle that Keanu Reeves is today the popular and successful person we all know. Reeves has not only overcome his strokes of fate, he even became stronger from them, as he says himself. Next, we come to a series star, who, for a long time, was predicted a glorious future, and who, during his heyday, was the highest paid boy actor in the world. The actor Angus T Jones, who for most people was simply Jake Harper from the comedy show 2.5 Men. While he was already getting $330,000 per episode as a 17-year-old, and no one had any doubt that he would have a great career even after the end of 2.5 Men, the tide turned completely in 2012. Namely, that year, Jones joined a Christian organization and didn't seem to be the same anymore. Among other things, he said that the role of Jake Harper was not compatible with his religion, and even urged his fans to boycott 2.5 Men. As a result, Jones was then written out of the show piece by piece, and only made a small appearance in the last episode. In the meantime, according to some reports, he has fallen out with numerous Hollywood producers due to his religious fanaticism, and hardly receives any more orders. By now, Jones has even turned his back on the church, and is now trying to gain a foothold in LA once again, with correspondingly moderate success. On number 6, we come to an actor who has made millions of people laugh with his roles, but for a long time had little to laugh about himself, namely Jim Carrey. While many people only know the silly actor with the crazy grimaces, Carrey had it extremely hard as a young adult. Already as a teenager, he was dismissed from school and had to manage on his own. Since he did not have money for an apartment, he had to drive around with a borrowed VW bus and was virtually homeless. The situation got even worse when he had to return the bus, and from then on only carried a small tent with him, which he pitched at night to avoid sleeping in the open air. For many, this sounds like an absolute nightmare, but even from this situation, Carrey was able to draw something positive. In fact, today, he says that during his time, he learned not to take the world so seriously, and even began to develop his now unique way of humor. Let's continue with an actress who had to fight for years to prevent her child from getting into strange circles. We are talking about Katie Holmes, who, for many years, was one of the most famous celebrity couples in the world, together with Tom Cruise. However, away from the cameras, it turned out not to be that rosy, and at the moment, when the two got divorced a few years ago, a conflict began, which especially traumatized Holmes extremely. Because Tom Cruise is one of the best-known members of the Scientology sect, Holmes was very afraid that their daughter, Suri, would end up in circles that are extremely criticized worldwide, even after the divorce without her supervision. Since the American actress Leah Remini, who was also a long time in Scientology, published what violent machinations behind closed doors in the sect are going on, many know how great the fear of Katie Holmes for her child must have been. Although Holmes was able to get custody on her side after long negotiations to keep Suri away from Scientology, many assume that the time of the divorce must have been extremely threatening for her. Next, we come to an American TV star who has often been ridiculed, but in reality has suffered greatly from all the criticism, and that is Caitlyn Jenner, who until a few years ago was still called Bruce Jenner and is the mother of Kendall and Kylie Jenner. Caitlyn Jenner is in fact a trans woman, which means that she came as a man into the world but never really felt comfortable in her body. For this reason, the former Olympic decathlete decided to undergo a sex change a few years ago and switch to a female identity. However, she had to put up with an extreme amount of malice for this step and was strongly attacked, especially on the internet. According to her own statement, this was one of the worst phases of her life, although she was actually happy to have finally taken the step she had wanted to for so long. To this day, she regularly suffers from numerous hostilities, which are anything but justified, and show that it is unfortunately still difficult for many people to accept others as they actually are. On number 3, we come to a former superstar who not only suffered a serious illness, but nobody knew about it. We're talking about Alan Rickman, whom most people probably remember in the role of Professor Snape in Harry Potter. The British actor, who was an absolute legend for many, died out of nowhere and completely unexpectedly of pancreatic cancer at the beginning of 2016. In comparison to other stars who are completely open about such illnesses, Rickman kept his fate a secret, and it was only after his death that it was revealed that he was terminally ill. Why he kept his illness a secret is not known, but it is known that he spent his last months in the circle of his loved ones, who probably made his last days as livable as possible. On number 2, we come to another Harry Potter star, who, in this case, unfortunately has had to fear for her own career for some time. Maggie Smith, who finally became a superstar as Professor Minerva McGonagall. Besides Harry Potter, there was another role that, in the meantime, took her to the top of the acting world, and that was in the series Downton Abbey, which, to this day, has millions of fans worldwide. But this attention quickly led to the fact that, at some point, Maggie Smith could hardly move undisturbed in public, from which she is said to have suffered greatly according to some statements. Since Maggie Smith attaches great importance to being able to leave the house like a normal person without bodyguards and limousines, her freedom was taken away, and the 86-year-old can no longer lead a normal everyday life. For this reason, she is said to have even decided to accept only small roles in lesser-known films in order to regain some of her privacy. For example, she now almost exclusively plays small roles as an extra, such as homeless people or saleswomen. Many say that she is regretting this step because she doesn't really enjoy these roles. On number 1, we now come to a historic accident that tragically entered the history books, and is for many one of the greatest dramas in film history: the day Grace Kelly died in an accident. Grace Kelly was one of the most successful and respected actresses in the world back in the 1950s, and, along with Marilyn Monroe, the face of the global film industry. Her fame was of such magnitude that she married Prince Rainier III of Monaco and had finally arrived in high society. Until September 14th, 1982, when Grace Kelly and her daughter got into a car and drove down a small mountain in Monaco. Unfortunately, for reasons that remain unexplained to this day, they went off the track and fell more than 40 meters. Although they could still be brought to a hospital, Grace Kelly succumbed to her injuries after only a few hours. For many, her demise has not been properly clarified to this day, and there are the wildest speculations as to whether it was just an accident, or whether she was even hunted down by members of organized crime in France. And that's it with our video. Write us in the comments which fate you found particularly violent, and what we have to make a video about soon. Otherwise, like this video if you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next time, here at Wonderlane.